since actually the killings continue. And hopefully that with the announced of President Obama, hopefully tomorrow, that Bashar al-Assad has stepped down, will thus convince more European countries and more Arabic countries to have joint efforts to help the Syrians and to stop the killings. At the end, we'll have started the transition in Syria. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Radwan. Ausama, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Middle East Institute. With the clock ticking on the Assads, I seem to be set on the Syrian opposition as leaders to the post-Assad era. Many are doubtful, however, of the opposition group's viability as a concrete replacement and of their ability to work together on transitioning Syria into a civil modern state. Historically, the opposition in Syria was composed of only the Damascus Declaration factions, the Kurdish parties, and wide spectrum of Islamists. But the revolution brought about many new different factions and parties. Opposition groups sprouted all over Syria. Neighborhoods, towns, and cities formed their own committees to protect their neighborhoods and coordinate their work. Each city has its own local committee and media group, but they have formed coordination committees to act together. As a result, all Friday themes are coordinated together, and over 70% of slogans chanted in protests are expressions of solidarity with other besieged cities. Many of those opposition groups evolved and merged with time, springing forth bigger committees. The biggest grassroots opposition groups in Syria, the local coordinating committees, LCC, and the Syrian Revolution Coordination Union, SRCU, were a direct outcome of such mergers. Both gained a lot of media exposure as grassroots Syrian revolution groups, but that does not mean that the Syrian streets owe their mobilization to them. LCC and SRCU are more of media advisory and tactic consultancy groups. Their presence is imperative as they maintain the non-violent nature of the revolution. But people were demonstrating long before those groups were formed. The mobilization of demonstrators is largely owed to Friday prayers and funerals. People of a certain localities who've never been to mosques their entire lives, such as atheists, Christians, Druze, and Alawites, started frequenting Sunni mosques extensively to gather and take part of, or sometimes incite, demonstrations. Whatever transpires from such congregations represents the will of the substantial portion of the population in that area in particular. It's imperative for the aforementioned points to be understood, because the EU and the US expectations of one unifying governing body of the Syrian opposition is somewhat insensible. What Syria is currently experiencing is a democracy. Millions of Syrians are expressing their desire to topple the regime and persecute the regime heads. Dozens of grassroots formations and complete political parties have been formed and are being formed to competitively lead Syrian and Syrian society through the transitional period. Many of those parties were formed by prominent Syrian intellectuals. They have already written manifestos and nowadays are starting to think about party memberships and representations, as well as which constituency each would appeal to. They already have started discussing the future constitution and restructuring of Syrian security and armed forces, for instance. Most groups in the opposition realize and agree that Syria needs a free market economy that serves the interests of all Syrians in a secular country. Nonetheless, in the post-Assad era, more movement and political parties will certainly sprout, and counting only on the current ones is premature. It would be better to start thinking about Syria's actual leadership further down the road, after all the Syrian factions inside and outside of the country have the chance to develop into parties. What could be done is the provision of more support to the inside opposition factions by connecting them with the outside opposition groups and figures. There are many grassroots movements at the moment who would greatly help drive the transition period forward by maybe forming a transitional advisory council. The US and the EU could help coalesce groups and individuals from the outside and inside opposition under the same roof. The opposition groups based outside have more understanding of foreign policies and are on the same page of expectations of most inside grassroots opposition groups. So they are the best candidates to act as buffer and proxies between Syria and the outside world. However, their tasks should not be minimalized to coordination and should be invested in as future key figures of Syria's politics. As currently that is what the Syrian opposition is missing, a few names and faces that could really rally inside and outside support. For those who fear sectarianism, it is worth mentioning that the Alawites are already supporting the revolution. They have extensively demonstrated inside Syria and have participated in most opposition conferences abroad. The Alawites have suffered the most because of the Assad regime, as living in an Alawite area, a person would more likely run into a regime member who would overstep on the rights of those around him. The regime might be made of Alawites mostly, but that is only because of the Assads and the Makhlouf's family alliance. The regime might try to make the revolution seem sectarian, but that is not true. The people are not fighting a minority. We have to set this very clear. They are fighting against a family ruling a country. Most of the alliances of this family are with the Sunni businessmen from Damascus and Aleppo mainly. And that is one of the major reasons for the delay of demonstrations or large demonstrations in these cities. Sunni businessmen are more influential with the Assads than most Alawites. They accumulated their wealth from allying themselves with the regime. They built their empires on the regime's corruption. They control most of Syria's investments and companies. If they turn against the regime will suddenly collapse. However, without the regime, they will probably be persecuted and will lose most of their businesses. So they will stick by the regime until they are confident that there is no way the regime is surviving. Their control of Damascus and Aleppo is faltering, though. The past 10 days, since the beginning of Ramadan, witnessed demonstrations all over Damascus and Aleppo. The city and the suburbs of each have finally and unilaterally expressed their discontent with the Assads. In turn, the regime no longer privileges them with special considerations, as the demonstrators in Aleppo and Damascus are now getting shot at and attacked by Shapiha regularly. The regime no longer tries to hide its brutality from Damascenes and Aleppians. All demonstrators around Syria now have to face live bullets, even right in the heart of the capital. The clock is ticking for the regime in Syria, and the Assad's era in the histories will be over soon. The only future the Assads will have are likely to be in courts. Thank you.
Thank you. Andrew Tabler, please.
Thanks, Kate. It's very nice to be here today. As Kate mentioned, I'm pinch hitting, so I have to think a little bit on my feet, and I did not have that much time to prepare. But given the pace of events and our current focus on Syria, hopefully I can bring up a couple of important points and also probably expand on some of those of Radwan and Ausama. I think maybe some of you know, but maybe some of you don't. I came to Washington about 2 years ago. I had spent about 14 years in the region, and 7 of those were in and out of Syria and Lebanon.